The Hells Angels had a long history of animosity toward the Rolling Stones, which is one of the reasons why there was once concern that the Hells Angels would try to assassinate Mick Jagger. In addition to the high-energy setlist that they were known for, the Rolling Stones had to fight with a number of monsters during their illustrious tour in the year 1972. This was a challenge for them. The members of the band Mick Jagger, Keith Richards, Bill Wyman, Charlie Watts, and Mick Taylor found themselves on the outs with the Hells Angels following a performance that ended in tragedy. At the time, the band was touring throughout North America and performing 48 gigs over the period of 2 months. This occurred after the tragedy raised concerns that the motorcycle gang had been on the lookout for victims to kill. The British rock bands had the best of intentions when they requested the Hells Angels to work as paid security for their free concert that took place in December 1969 at the Altamont Speedway in California. According to the urban legend, club members were purportedly compensated with $500 worth of booze, and in exchange, they were expected to maintain order throughout the establishment. In addition, they were expected to keep order throughout the establishment. This did not take place, and as a consequence, the situation quickly descended into chaos as the so-called security quickly resorted to violence and tried to keep the rowdy crowd under control. Meredith Hunter, a black supporter who was 18 years old at the time, became involved in a confrontation with members of the club that was in part motivated by racial hostility. In an effort to defend himself during the altercation, Meredith Hunter was tragically stabbed after the assailant pulled out a weapon from his pocket. The Stones were aware of the difficulties, but they were ignorant that Hunter had truly passed away before their eyes. They continued the show out of worry that if they concluded their set earlier than intended, a riot may break out in the audience. The aftermath of the deadly event was a mess of people pointing fingers and laying blame for what happened. The Hells Angels were infuriated because they believed the Rolling Stones had allowed them to take the responsibility for Hunter's passing, while the Rolling Stones were incensed that they were being held responsible for the chaos that ensued. Both groups felt aggrieved that they were being blamed for the mayhem. The fact that the band refused to reimburse the Hells Angels for the $50,000 in legal costs that they incurred as a result of the subsequent murder trial enraged them even more. Soon after, rumors began to spread that the Hells Angels intended to retaliate by either murdering or kidnapping Jagger as a means of getting their own back on the rival motorcycle gang. The Rolling Stones have increased the level of protection around them by taking additional measures, such as employing 2 armed bodyguards and restricting their travel to only private jets and limousines. This decision was made in reaction to the fact that there have been previous instances of the band receiving threats of death. When they checked into hotels, they would close off entire floors and give only members of their security detail and their entourage access to certain areas. The stories continued to spread, and at one point, Jagger and Richards were served in San Francisco with a subpoena that had to do with the club's litigation against the band. The subpoena was served by a lady acting as a fan who was welcomed aboard their private plane. The subpoena had to do with the club's litigation against the band. They hurriedly booted her and her documentation off the plane, and then they fled the city. There is no question that Jagger and the other members of the band made it through the trip unscathed by any injuries. According to a report that was published in the New York Times in 1971, a member of the Hells Angels named Alan Passaro was ultimately found not guilty of first-degree murder. It was because of Passaro's testimony that he was acquitted of the charge of attempted murder in the stabbing death of Hunter. Even though Passaro had passed away in 1985, the investigation into the murder of Hunter continued for a number of years as officials investigated rumors that a second man had been the one to really knife Hunter. NBC News reports that the inquiry into the incident was concluded and closed in the year 2005.